This is the Stacking Days Podcast, the podcast about the healing experience of recovery for people of color by people of color. This show is for the purpose of education and connection and is not a replacement for therapy or recovery care. We suggest you seek out the support of a trained professional for guidance with your specific circumstance. I'm your host, Ray Donovan, and I've been alcohol-free since September 2021. Welcome to the show. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Stacking Days Podcast. This is your host, Ray Donovan. Really excited again about this episode for a few different reasons. One, because I've been following this individual on social for some time, so I feel like she's got a lot to share. She's also in longer-term sobriety, which is always a gift for us on the show. And then number two, we actually collaborated on a panel recently around, BIPOC community stepping into summer as a sober summit. So, she's got a lot that I think that she's going to add to our broader conversation. So without further ado, let me introduce Crystal to the mic. Crystal, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on your podcast. My name is Crystal. I live in Homewood, Illinois, and I am a wife, a mom, and I work in higher education. So I am really pleased to be here, and I'm really pleased to talk about this important topic because this is one of the most important things to me as a sober person. So I'm excited.
Thank you, Crystal. I mean, I'm excited to have you here and chat with you. We'll get right into it. Let's not waste any time here. Yeah. Let's go back to the early days when your relationship with alcohol started. Can you kind of bring me all the way back to somewhere around day one and give me a sense of kind of what brought you into that mindset, what brought you to this substance, and then we can kind of just take it from there.
Absolutely. So I can remember when I first got drunk. So I'll say that. And I was very young. I think I was like 16. I was with friends and we were doing a drinking game. So I wasn't aware of how fast alcohol can affect you, how much you can drink and how it'll hit you. So I was losing this game and I was drinking a lot and I passed out. And I remember my friends around me, I can hear, but I couldn't do anything. But I can hear them and they were panicking because they were also 15, 16 years old. So they don't know what to do. And then there was an older guy there. He took over. He put water on my face. He wiped my face off and he gave me water and I started to come to. I never forgot that feeling of being completely out of control of myself. That didn't stop me though, because after that, I continued to drink. I worked in the food industry. I started as a hostess and then went up from there. And I ended up becoming a bartender. And I think that's when I started getting carried away, I would say, as a bartender, because I had access to alcohol. That's being very transparent and blunt. But I had access to that world of alcohol. And I didn't see anything wrong with it because everybody around me drank. And I suffer from a lot of anxiety. So alcohol was like that temporary fix that would make you feel, less anxious. But over time, it just became more and more and more. And so I just used alcohol as somewhat of medicine. I didn't know I had a problem, I would say, until college. I think I knew I had issues. I would drink a lot, but I was typically healthy. But it was in college when I started to hide bottles in my apartment, away from my son. And I remember finding empty bottles, but I would try to get rid of those bottles because I'm like, okay, I need to get rid of this stuff before my son sees it. But I started to realize that's not a good thing. But I felt good about nobody living with me but my son because I can hide it better. So I was like, I'm going to hide it underneath, I'm going to hide it in my shoes. That's really when I started. I'm hide it in my laundry basket, And so after hiding alcohol for a while, I'm like, okay, I got issues. And I met my husband in college. That's when I started to really feel embarrassed because this man started to find those bottles that I was hiding and he brought it to my attention. And I'm like, I'm being defensive now because I'm like, I just had it under there because I don't want my son to see it. I'm starting to use these as an excuse, but I think that it was because of him, really, in some ways, that I started to realize, okay, you have a problem. But that didn't stop me. That did not stop me from drinking. I got better at it. I got better at hiding alcohol, and it just started to unravel so badly that I was drinking to function. Even though I thought I was functioning well, I felt like if I didn't drink, I wasn't functioning well. I felt anxious if I didn't drink. So when I got off work, if I didn't have alcohol at home, I stopped at the liquor store. I had to have it in my house. I had to have it every day. And I knew in that moment that, okay, like something's wrong. And I felt, and I don't know how you felt, but I felt like a prisoner after a while, because every time that I left work or, it was part of my day, I felt like I had to have it. So either I had to stop at the liquor store, and I would stop at different ones because I didn't want them to think that I had a problem. Yeah. So I would stop at different liquor stores to get alcohol. You
don't want to go to the same one too many days in a row, right?
No, I would stop at different ones. And I was getting very creative with how I got access to alcohol, because, I would go get money out the ATM because I didn't want it to be on my, statement, stuff like that. And that's when you start to realize, like, yeah, you got a big problem. And it was really taking over my life in a way that I didn't even realize, because what people don't realize is that your friends and family will not always tell you when they feel like you've been drinking. They won't always bring to you, hey, I think that you got a problem, because it's a hard conversation to have. It really is. And so when I think back, I'm like, well, why didn't you tell me if I'm talking to my husband, or why didn't, that's a difficult conversation to have with somebody. Like, you smell like booze.
We'll get back on track of the story, but I am curious, like in you asking them that, like, what did they say? Did they say they didn't want to, like, embarrass you? They didn't want to have the confrontation. They didn't think it was appropriate. Like, they didn't think you had a problem. What was it? Because I am very curious about that, specifically in communities of color, where in a lot of ways we're quiet about many things. I am curious what the kind of feedback was when you asked that explicitly.
And I think I've only asked him. I think he said he was afraid because of my reaction. And so I can't recall my reactions too much when I was drinking, but I'll tell you this. My sister, who I did a shout out for, just celebrated 1 year. I was nervous to tell her when I knew that perhaps she was drinking. So I was already sober. So I was nervous at times where I'm like, I don't want to make her feel, some kind of way. Yeah. And so I can only imagine what people felt about me. So I think that feeling is that they're nervous to say, hey, you smell like booze, because they're like, I don't want to make her feel uneasy. I don't want to, hurt her feelings, because I thought I was hiding it really well. And I don't think
so. That almost reinforces the fact that you think you're hiding it really well when no one's saying anything to you about it.
Yes.
But they're all thinking like, Crystal is, she smells like she drank. She's telling us she hasn't. I've been there, But then, I think also, like, you talk about, the hiding of things, and, the currency that you're using to, pay for your alcohol versus having on your statement. I've just found that at a certain point, there was so much, like, energy and kind of mind share that I was using that was going towards, like, this aspect of my life that I didn't really have a whole lot of pride in. Like, I didn't, but you go through so much to try to cover your tracks, so to speak. But it's like, you're not fooling yourself ultimately. And I think that that's what it is, because what you're up to when you're in the midst of doing it, right?
Absolutely. I knew exactly what I was doing, and it was just, I told people this. It's one thing I said: two people you don't lie to, yourself and your doctor. Right. So I was lying to myself, like, you don't have a problem, and I think people lie to themselves because they don't typically look like, if somebody saw me or saw yourself, sometimes they don't equate that to being an alcoholic. Yeah. You're not an alcoholic. I've been told that, like, you don't know what alcoholic is, I'm like, yeah. But yes, I am, because I know I have a serious problem, and that's problems. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, I think that's why I have so much respect for you and the folks that I've spoken to and heard talk about their story, because there is quite the spectrum when it comes to people who have, an alcoholism issue, substance use issue. And we need to see like all shades of that,
Yeah.
because I feel like we almost do ourselves a disservice when, you're clearly sitting there struggling and the people that you're looking to for support are telling you that you don't have an issue. When you know that like there's some stuff going on behind the scenes here that if you knew everything, you'd surely know that there's an issue. Because, the book is what's the saying that they use? Never judge a book by its cover,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And I feel like at a lot of times, like alcoholics can put on a real good front until you can't anymore, but you
Yes.
can for a long time. And, and at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because it's, the chickens will come home to roost, so to speak.
If that's not the truth, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I just, and it's embarrassing at times. It's no longer embarrassing for me to talk about everything that's happened, but
Yeah.
I think it's early in my sobriety. And I think that's a lot of times when I would relapse, it's because when you stop drinking, you have to think about everything and you have to feel it. And I think that's the hardest part about when I stopped. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest part for a lot of folks who have for a long period of time managed to dull themselves down from feeling a lot of those feelings.
Mm-hmm.
That was hard for me. It still is. I mean, I'm almost 2 years in and, being very honest about my emotions and how I am kind of interacting with the world and just trying to relearn. It's like at 40 some odd years old, I feel like I'm a teenager just learning things and how to deal with things for the first time. So I certainly empathize with you on that for sure.
Yeah, I feel younger. Like you said, I feel like a child learning who I am, what I like, all those things, because in sobriety is like a totally different way of life. Because you're afraid, because before it's like you go drinking, anything you're invited to, you're like, we're going to drink, and so now I have to plan, my first wedding as a sober person, and I appreciate them for doing this. They had one side where they had like bubbling, cider, and the other side they have alcohol. Ooh, I was so excited because I was so nervous to go to this wedding, because I was like, I didn't know at the beginning of my sobriety how to tell people, hey, I don't drink. I didn't know how to say it and not feel nervous about saying it. I don't know why I felt nervous, but it's just a different way of being in life. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, and we'll get back into your story, but I think just to touch on that, I feel like a lot of the nervous comes from, we're just not accustomed to being honest, and it's like, and that's a real honest, like statement. And you're worried that you're going to be judged for your honesty.
Yes.
And that's a scary proposition for someone who's tried for such a long time to cover it up.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, let's go back then. Talk to me. So now, you're hiding stuff. You got bottles in your shoe. Now you got your man's come into your life. You have your son. Like, where are we at now? Right. You obviously are probably still functioning at a high level. It sounds like, but you have it sounds like a very strong dependency also. So where are we at now, and how do we kind of move into a space where you're now saying, I got to address this, and then let's talk about that.
I think it's my son in some ways, because he knew I drank a lot, but he will follow me through my house. I think he knew exactly where my alcohol was in the house. So he would come right behind me when I was in my, going look in my closet. He knew that because he would come right up under me and try to I don't know if he was trying to stop me or he's trying to see what I was doing, but those little moments started to add up for me.
How old was your son, if you don't mind me asking, at the time?
My son now is 21. He'll be 22 this year.
Okay.
So I had him as a teenager. So this man now, this boy has watched a lot. He has seen a lot. And I think that I made the choice because, let's back up. I remember having these pains. I had pains on my side. And so that's when I started realizing maybe the alcohol is starting to make me feel taking a toll on my health. And so I went to the doctor and they scanned me and they were like, you have fatty tissue around your pancreas and all this stuff. I panicked. I'm like, oh no, my son is not, and my husband, but in my head, my son, because he's watched me, we grew up together in some ways, but it's I don't want this man to watch me die or kill myself because of alcohol, something that I actually can control. Yeah. And so it was, and I'm not trying to fast forwarded to February, but I literally woke up the day that I stopped drinking and said, I'm not going to drink anymore. I didn't.
Okay.
It was nothing spectacular. You know, it wasn't even a plan. It was that morning. I don't know what it was. I was like, I'm going to today, not drink.
Did you say today I'm not drinking? I'm no longer a drinker. I'm not drinking anymore. Or you were just saying that I'm not going to drink today?
So and so my method was in that morning, I said, I'm not going to drink today. Okay. And that actually worked for me, right? Because I started to say to myself, today I choose not to drink. And it was important that I did that because prior experiences for me was, I'm going to stop drinking for 30 days. Mm-hmm. Or other times I'll be like, I'm going to stop drinking. I'm going to work out. I'm going to do all these things. And that it was all grand things, but it was overwhelming.
Yeah.
This time I was like, I'm just not going to drink. And it started to add up for me each day. I would and it was out loud in the mirror. I would say, today I choose not to drink. And it was easier for me because 24 hours, I wasn't going to drink. And so then, I had to just continue to keep saying that to myself. And it really did work out for me. Obviously 6 years in, it worked for me because I didn't take on too much. I just realized that I had 24 hours and it just kept on adding up. Mm-hmm.
So I understand the storyline. This day in February 6 years ago, when you woke up and basically said, "This is it. Today I choose not to drink." It sounds like you had a few different attempts before that, whether they be 30 days, whether they be maybe a few days here and there that didn't work out for you, and ultimately you got to that one day where you had a kind of a paradigm pivot on and how you approached it, and that is what ultimately was successful for you.
Yes,
because I want to highlight this though, is because when I hear that, I don't hear that you just woke up one day and decided not to drink.
Right.
I hear that you had been trying to get to that place for a period of time and just kind of didn't find a successful technique or tool that worked for you, and ultimately you were able to pair your will with a system that worked for you that you've created. But I mean, I know how that is, where you're like, maybe 6 months, a year, you keep, trying to do different things. I mean, I walked in to an AA room 6 years before I ultimately got to a point where I had to make that call and stop drinking. So I want to applaud you for that, not undermine, your path into that day in February.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It is the prior, before I would stop drinking, but I always knew I was going to start drinking again. And I think we have very similar stories when you talked about AA not being for you and your technique in which you did it. I read a lot. I didn't listen to podcasts, but I did read a lot. I would pick up, just look up blogs and see how people are doing. And I would read relapse stories because I wanted to see how they felt during their relapse, what was going on. And that really helped me. I know that sounds horrible to hear about somebody relapse, but I just know that I read one woman relapse after 10 years of sobriety. And I was like, oh my goodness. And it was simply because she said she felt peer pressure when she turned 40 because everybody wanted to drink. And I was like, I don't want to be that. I don't want to do that. And that's one of my techniques, is that I'm never cocky. I'm never thinking like, I got this sobriety thing. Every day I choose to be sober. And it's always at the forefront of my mind. I'm a sober person. And I'm proud to tell people that, because it just keeps me accountable, first of all. But it also, it's like, I'm proud in that space and I want to stay in that space. And so, yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
I think it's important, and I was speaking with Shari Hampton a few episodes back, and we were talking about relapse. And I think it's important to note that there is nothing negative that comes from relapse. Number one, for the individual who's experienced it. And then number two, if you're able to recount those relapses, other people can also learn from your experience, which I think is just as powerful, because that helps you kind of get over that proverbial craving or hump, that you might, or the you or I might experience at some point in our journey. I think it's important to note that. I wanted to ask you a question around kind of like those first couple years.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that you had kind of your daily mantra that in you choosing not to drink,
Yeah.
that you would, that you would echo to yourself. What else were you doing besides kind of reading a lot of the quote unquote quit lit to string together your early days of sobriety? Because, there's the thought around, abstaining, living an alcohol-free life isn't just about not drinking. It's also
Right.
about, for those who can be successful in it longer term, which you have been at 6 years, there are other pieces that come into play to be able to kind of hold up that foundation. So I'm curious, what are some of the other tools that maybe you created for yourself or you turned to over the course of your earlier sobriety that you would share with the audience that might be helpful for them too?
I think one of the most important things that I did when I got sober, because nobody knew I was sober, I think until a month into my sobriety. I didn't tell my husband. I didn't tell anybody. Maybe he noticed something was different, but I was very quiet because I needed to do this for myself. And I needed to focus in on the sobriety and not just kind of make it hey, I'm sober, because I tried it many times and I was unsuccessful. So this time I was very quiet and I gave myself a lot of grace because we feel like we need to get a lot done and do a lot. In the beginning of my sobriety, I just did the basic things. I got myself together to go to work. I worked and I went home and I kind of watched TV, listened to music, and I wrote a lot. I wrote in my journal, and it didn't have to be a lot. I just wrote something. If I felt, something was on my mind, I would just insert it in my journal because it helped me get whatever's in here on paper. Mm-hmm. One of the other reasons I was drinking is because I suffer from anxiety, but I also have ADD. So I have a lot going on in my head. And when that happens, you feel anxious. And so you drink. And so it was like this cycle. So I had to find techniques in which I would, write out what was going on in my head. Mm-hmm. And then I started to do prompts. So I found some prompts online to ask, myself questions about sobriety and things like that, things about myself. And it helped me to kind of get to know myself. But you say Shari, I don't want to say her name wrong.
Shari.
You interview her? Yeah. She mentioned something that stood out to me because early in my sobriety, there was a prompt that asked me, what would happen that would make you fall off the wagon? What would happen in your life that would make you drink again? Mm-hmm. And I wrote in there, if something tragic happened, if I lost somebody very close to me, that probably we would do it. It was 6 months to 7 months later, I went back to that entry and I wrote nothing. I went in there and I crossed that out. I said, nothing can happen to cause me to drink, because I think when we find excuses, then we're not on the right track. You cannot find an excuse to drink. And so I had to find that I had to eliminate all excuses and say nothing is going to cause me to go back to that life. I'm never going to drink. It doesn't matter. And when she said she went to her father's funeral sober, that is a huge achievement. Totally, to go in those spaces sober. And it's a better experience because you remember it, all those things. So whether good or bad, it's a good experience to experience life sober. So I started to get my toolbox together in here about what I need to do in case of an emergency. We have emergency packs for other things. If something happens, what do I need to do, in this situation? And I know you can't predict, life, but I just know that one thing I won't do is drink. So I think eliminating excuses was huge for me.
I love that. An emergency toolkit, because you are going to have those moments that are just, they feel like kind of these watersheds, where you're just, inundated with more than you are accustomed to dealing with on a daily basis. I do think losing a loved one is one of those moments that is just really hard to manage. And for those who have a substance issue, you're probably going to turn to a bottle. I went to a funeral last year for my uncle. He was basically, like a brother to me, only a couple years older than I was. And, we grew up together in large part, and he died unexpectedly. He's literally a couple years older than I am. And I was at his funeral and early in my sobriety, and just like a completely emotional mess because of this thing that's happening that I just couldn't understand, couldn't explain. But to your point, I stuck in there and I didn't drink ultimately to like ease my pain. And I'm glad that I was able to do that because it allowed me to really kind of, put that where it needed to be over the course of, of accepting the fact that he's passed. But one thing that was so wild to me in the moment that I had never really noticed before, and I've been to funerals before, is that as we were lowering him into the ground, folks who were around the casket were drinking Hennessy.
Wow.
Almost like in celebration. And it's like, look, at the end of the day, like, I'm not here to be a judge on how anybody wants to live their life, but I just thought culturally, like that's, I just thought that was an interesting moment and I was choosing something else and ultimately, worked for me, but how prevalent, and how easy it could have been to just be like, you know what, this is too much. Just give me a shot,
Yes, absolutely.
So I appreciate the fact that you call it that emergency toolkit. I never thought about it like that.
Yeah.
And there inevitably are going to be some of those moments, especially as you start to age, right? That, might happen in your life that you got to get yourself prepared for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And congratulations to you for resisting that willpower, but I'm sorry for your loss also. Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Talk to me about your husband now. So you get past that first month. I'm assuming the cat got out of the bag at some point.
Yeah.
Now you're starting to have those external conversations around a very monumental decision that you've made for yourself. How did that transpire? Knowing that and then I also want to talk about your son was also privy to who you had been up until that point.
So the reaction is not what I had, imagined it would be. I think that my husband was just watching. I know that he probably was super proud of me after I said, it's been a month or so. I don't know when I told him, but I know he was probably super proud of me. But also because I had tried and failed, I think he was more so watching me. And so he's very supportive. And I think that he is really proud of me. He's told me that I've made it this far. But in these moments where I started to announce to people that I was sober, what I realized is this journey is a journey just for me. Before it was like, well, I need you to, encourage me. I need this person to encourage me and things like that. In this instance, my husband was like, good for you. I'm really proud of you. Keep going. And that was it, and I'm like, where's my monthly balloons? Where's my flowers, for giving up alcohol. Right. And that didn't come. And I'm grateful for it because sometimes we do lean on other people to encourage us in that direction. I need that encouragement. But I found that this journey, I was really like pushing myself. And if I ever, and I said that before, if I never hear encouragement from anybody else, I'm still going to be on this journey. I'm going to encourage myself. And so I really have found that I encourage myself daily. My son is super proud of me. I think that he's never said out loud, Mom, I'm proud of you, but he talks to me way more. He interacts with me way more. And the trust level, I can tell the trust level with us has increased. So I think it's the behavior it's the relationship has improved. We always had a good relationship, but I think he can trust me. I think it made him nervous. If I'm drinking out with my friends and I'm driving home, like you could be in a car accident, and I can only imagine the anxiety he may have felt in those instances. So I think that my son is very proud of me, and I'm my husband as well. But again, I think that experience of telling people and thinking it was going to be something different, it really taught me that this journey belongs to me. It's my journey, and I'll stand on it whether people can celebrate me or not. I'll still be on this journey.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
it is true that oftentimes we're looking at for external validation for for whatever we do in life, right?
Oh yeah.
And sometimes maybe even early in sobriety, this is one of them where you want to be celebrated for, something that people, some folks might have hoped you've been, had done a long time ago. But to your point, like if you start this journey because for you versus doing it for other people, I think that you're less dependent on their recognition for your decision because you're doing it for the right reasons. So I love the fact that you called that out.
Absolutely.
So now let's move forward. You're 6 years in, and you also have a sister who's a year in, and obviously she's not in the show, so I don't, you don't have to, recount her story. But has your example, do you feel, of in how you've pursued your sobriety, has that rubbed off on how she's kind of looked at her own relationship, or is it just kind of mutually exclusive and she independently got to this place, on her own accord?
She has told me that I'm an inspiration to her, and I never went to my sister and said, you need to stop drinking. Like I just stopped drinking and I started celebrating myself and telling her how awesome it is. I like how clear I think, and I like how my skin cleared up. I started talking about the benefits, and because we're identical twin sisters, I think she started to see like, my sister is doing it, I can do it. And she did, and I can't wait for people to hear her story, and I'm gonna let her tell it, when she's ready. But I think that it was because I was just showing up sober and telling her the benefit of it that she was inspired to get there, for sure. She's expressed that to me. So for my method of being sober and encouraging other people is to show up and show them that a sober life is a life worth living, and it's worth it. Yeah.
I love that. I mean, and we can't underestimate like the positive ripple effects of the decisions that we make. I mean, it goes both ways. Like if we make some fucked up decisions, that will affect some people as well, right? Excuse my language for those who are sensitive. This is an explicit show. But again, if we make some positive decisions, for our own lives, that potentially could also cascade and affect others around us positively as well. And I feel like, for folks who are anchors in their family, it sounds like you are, at least your sibling, and you have a son. I mean, those you impact your decisions and the way you live your life impact the folks who are around you. So I think it's really powerful to mention.
Absolutely.
Can you talk to me a little bit about the importance of like community for you, as now that you are 6 years into your journey, and I think a lot of this really started with you at the core and trying to figure out you. Does community play a part in that for you? Was it a part for you in your early stages, and where does that play for you now?
So when you say community, when I think of community, I felt like my books and the blogs and all those things were my community. Oh, yeah. And I was able to control that community because I consumed it when I wanted it or needed it, and then I put it away. So it really helped me to have the app and, like blogs and books and things like that. As I got deeper into my sobriety, Instagram and social media has been so important to me. I may not post as much as other people post, but I'm always scrolling through, and my whole timeline changed. It went from alcohol and, people talking about all that stuff to people inspiring each other through, being sober and stuff like that. I was like, oh, it's a whole world out here of sober people, and it's wonderful because you feel, at times you feel alone because everybody drinks. It's the culture. It's everywhere you look. And so when you start seeing these people online and they're admitting that they are sober, I'm like, oh my God, I am too. I want to talk to them, and and I love reading their posts and things like that. And I love the vulnerability. I love the honesty, because it helps other people get there. And even when, like you said, when you relapse, everybody's like, you can get back up, let's go. It's crazy how you almost feel like a family with other sober people. You almost feel like a family with people you've never met before. And
it is interesting, right? Like, I feel like, and mind you, like I said, I'm only, 2 years in. So even being involved in this online sober community is relatively new for me. Yeah. It sounds like this didn't even exist for you in your early days, and it's something that's kind of come more to pass lately. Is that right?
Yeah, I think the Instagram, like the social media stuff, I just didn't realize it was there. I started the sober thing page, and then people start following me all over, and then they'll message me, and I'm like, there are a lot of people. There are people who are sober, and then there are people who are like curious, and it's just like a new world. It's a whole new world for me, and it gets better over time. I know you say you're 2 years in, but it almost like it unfolds, and you start learning new things about yourself, about other people, and it's like learning to walk again. That sounds dramatic, but it really is learning to live a whole different life than the life you had before.
Would you say that now at 6 years in, it's more of just like a lifestyle for you, or do you find yourself, every so often truly like learning something that you just never expected would be the case this far into your sobriety?
When you said learning about myself,
learning about yourself, or something that is surprising to you that's come with sobriety that you never expected, that you stumbled on at 6 years in versus something that you came upon, a year or 2 years in.
I would say that I get stronger each year in my sobriety, and I get stronger in a sense where I'm like more vocal and more confident about that. I'm not confident about a whole lot of things, but sobriety is like I would literally, like I have sober on my shirt. It's almost like in some ways an advocate. It's like I'm turning into an advocate for it because I know that, what positive things it has brought to me. And so that's why I'm more confident than I've ever been in this space than before.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that have come to you that, maybe you thought were never for you that, sobriety's provided?
I think so I would avoid a lot of things that would get in the way of my drinking. So I'm willing to try new things and even food, I'll avoid eating something that would like make me feel sick if I drank. I would choose the drink over that. Now, give me all the ice cream, give me all the sweets, give me all the things that I used to kind of turn down because, alcohol and milk really didn't go together for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm willing to try new things. And I did realize something else. I have to accept the new Crystal. I think people are afraid of accepting a new person, but I had to accept that sometimes I don't want to go to certain things, but I would go before because, there was drinking there and I felt safe in that, that people would accept me because I got a drink. I don't feel as nervous. But sometimes I turn down opportunities to go to a party and that's okay. Now at 6 years in, I'll go to a party, but I know my limitations. So if I'm overstimulated, I got to go, I got to go home, stuff like that. So when I say I'm more confident, it's because I know me more and I'm like, okay, I'm up here. I'm at capacity now. I got to go. Yeah. I got to go home. And so again, I'm still learning who I am. I'm starting to try new hobbies. I want to knit this day and then do something else the next day. But I love it because it feels like the opportunities and things are endless. I could just try anything and I don't have to worry about, I'm drunk or I'm sleepy. I would sleep a lot when I drank. I don't have to worry about those things anymore. And that makes me feel even better about my life now. Yeah.
Do you ever have to when you wake up, do you still kind of pinch yourself to when you realize that you're still sober and you've been sober for some time? I feel like, for me, at least every once in a while, I just, it's almost surreal, that I am. And I'm like, geez, I wake up scared, that I don't have a hangover,
I would say that, yes, that is because I didn't think I could get here. That's what it's like. Yeah. Me, not drinking at all. I didn't even know that was possible for me, if I'm being honest, because I'm like, I drank so much that I felt like that was just a part of who I am. And that's part of my life. I couldn't even picture what sobriety looked like. That's how bad, it was for me. Cause I'm like, what does that look like? So I do pinch myself.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So I have a couple questions that I'm going to ask as we kind of close out our conversation, if that's okay with you.
No, absolutely.
Cool. So first question is, and we alluded and talked a little bit about this earlier in the conversation, but a question that I ask every guest is, how would someone who was close to you have known that you were struggling at the time when you were in your darkest days without you having told them explicitly?
How would they have known?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I was falling apart, I think. So you're saying for my actions and things like that?
I mean, there's no right or wrong answer. I think that, it could be anything.
I think people knew something was going on with me, but I'm a pretty positive person all the time. But I think my sister, even though she was also drinking, I think she knew something was up. My parents absolutely knew something was up because I would just I wasn't my true self. I think they knew who my true self was before I did. And so I think that they saw the light in me then. I think that's what it is. I get emotional when I talk about that because it's like my sober self is like this bright light, but before it was so dim. Everything was kind of dim. I didn't write. I didn't do a lot that I do now and that I did before, as a young person, that they saw just go away. I'm very creative. That went away. So the most important thing for me was drinking. And so, it just made me look like a different person, swollen, not put together, and just kind of all over the place. Even though I was like functioning, I was getting my degrees and, like those things, I was still not the bright light that they knew. And again, if I could just sit and talk to my parents, they probably would tell me the truth and it would hurt so badly. But I think they knew I was drinking because they could smell it, or they knew, the story that they probably would never tell me. Mm-hmm.
That's powerful though. And I've heard this before too, like they recognized that there was a giant asleep inside of you, and it's almost like you needed to get to this point of sobriety for that, the giant to reawaken.
Yes.
In some ways. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yes.
Last question I have for you, for someone who's sitting there listening to the show, maybe on the fence, maybe evaluating their own relationship with alcohol, what would you suggest to that person be their kind of first step if they don't really know what a potential first step could be to take?
I would definitely, and I would go back to my suggestion, I would definitely, one, identify that you may have a problem and kind of unpack that a little bit. Just write it out. Like, why do you think you have a problem? Write down a list of the pros and cons of what you're doing. But I also would say, try out the method of not drinking. Say, today I choose not to drink, just to see how it feels to be in that space, because it's not overwhelming to say I won't drink this morning. Maybe cut the day in half. I'm not going to drink this, the first half of the day, and kind of add to it. I would say that do baby steps, because sometimes people are just like, I'm going to jump right in, and then it's catastrophic. You're probably worse off than you were before. But just kind of have a little grace for yourself and say, you know what, today I choose not to drink.
I love that. Baby steps are important. Every journey requires that first baby step. So, so with that, Crystal, I really do appreciate it. I want to make sure that folks know where to find you, because I do think that there's something special about the online community, and the more, faces and voices that sound like us out there talking about this is important. So where can the audience make sure that they can find you?
Right now, you can find me Do the Sober Thing on Instagram, and that's where I am right now. And so I would love to follow you back.
Okay, cool. With that said, Crystal, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. I really do appreciate it, and I'm sure we'll stay connected from here on out.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for listening to the Stack and Days podcast. If you'd like to get in touch with the show, email me at rdg@stackanddays.com or follow us on Instagram @stackanddays. If you like the podcast, please rate, review, subscribe, and by all means share it with a friend who you think needs to be invited into the conversation. Until we meet again, be well, one day at a time.